Before we begin, I would also like to add a trigger warning for anyone who is sensitive to certain topics. Please take care when you're watching this video. Pause it, take a breath if you need to, or we will add timestamps so that you can skip around and skip over the parts that you may not be comfortable hearing or watching.
The level at which they would frankly pummel women emotionally, heavy manual labor, et cetera, if somebody became pregnant until they reached their breaking point and agreed to terminate and were forced to do so. We had a lawsuit and that was one of the causes of action, was that I was forced to do that twice.
Oh no.
And in that lawsuit, I made a list of every single woman that I personally knew had been forced to do that. Mm-hmm. And my list was 70 women long. Some of those had been forced to do it up to 6 times.
No. Oh my gosh, that's awful.
It is.
Hey, my name is Shelise and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. As always, if you're only listening and you want to see our faces, you can go to my YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness, where you can join in on the conversation, leave some words of encouragement for our guests who are coming on and bravely telling their stories, and of course, subscribe, become a supporter and an advocate. So today's guest, you have seen her on once before. This is a part 2 episode. However, you do not need to go watch the first one before this. You can watch them in any order, but it will give a little bit more context as to her early childhood days within Scientology. So this guest is someone who has their own YouTube channel with their husband called Blown for Good. And she is also the president of the Aftermath Foundation, which helps people who are trying to escape Scientology get back on their feet. So thanks so much for joining us again, Claire Headley.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me back.
Absolutely. And the first episode went so well. We recorded it yesterday and we had so much to talk about. We went into your childhood, what it was like being raised in Scientology. I mean, you were in these special schools. You didn't have a whole lot of time with your mother. And now we're going to be talking about your teen life on and how you kind of rose to the ranks of Scientology and then what made you finally leave.
Yes. Sounds good.
Yeah. So where we left off is you were around 13, 14, I believe. And I guess what I'm wondering the most is what it was like as a teenager being raised within these confines of I guess you could call it religious confines, even though they don't technically call themselves a religion, but they are for tax reasons. It's kind of messy, but yeah, what it was
exactly.
Like for you.
It's the narrative shifted dramatically. Yeah, no, absolutely. I really had no interest as a child in being a Scientologist. You know, I didn't understand that I needed help. So I was like, why do I need to do counseling? For example, I'm perfectly fine. I'm happy. I don't need this. And my mom just kept pushing and insisting that the only reason I didn't know that I needed it is because, you know, I needed to be enlightened and I needed to, study the directives and the policies from L. Ron Hubbard. And this was, the way. At somewhere though, in my teenage years, I had some road bumps, and unfortunately those kind of ended up pushing me very deep into Scientology. And I just kind of embraced it as the world out there is a bad place. There's bad people. So I'm going to accept my fate, accept the path of least resistance, as it were. I do think that it was driven by wanting acceptance and approval from my parents, which cooperation with Scientology was a requirement for that. And anyway, so I just kind of thought, well, I'll give it a shot and go all in. And so I started on, we were talking about, doing the counselor training and just started moving up the ranks in terms of my training levels. All along though, so we talked about how my mother was in the Sea organization until I was age 10. I'd already signed a billion-year contract at age 7. Then I signed another one when I was 12, and then another one when I was 14.
Wow.
And I was just constantly being heavily pressured to join this organization. And as a teenager, I did not know how to get out from under that pressure. It was very, very difficult. It was very stressful. It was, I just felt like I was a bad person if I wasn't going to be joining this organization. And eventually I caved, and I was like, okay, I'm going to join this organization now myself. And by this time I was 16 years old in Los Angeles. So it was July 1991. And when I told my mother, even though she's a Scientologist, she was crying and upset. And because she herself had been in the Sea organization, she knew full well that if anything went sideways and I didn't end up making it in the Sea organization, or if I tried to escape, or, on and on and on, then that would potentially destroy our relationship. And I think that's what she was most scared of, looking back on it, which ironically, she was right. Mom, you were right. I shouldn't have joined this organization. So,
quick question for you. Why did you have to sign so many contracts if it's for 1 billion years? Is it a different contract as you age up?
No, it's the same contract. It's just that recruiters, I think they actually get a statistic, like a number on their graph for a number of CR contracts signed. So because it was different recruiters, each one of those recruiters wanted me to sign a contract with them.
Got it.
So it was really just a numbers thing.
Yeah, just for show. And I want to add some context here to how serious this is, like your mom's concern. So for people who aren't aware, if Claire were to leave, well, she did, she becomes seen as a suppressive person, and anyone who is still in the good graces of Scientology has to disconnect from her. They don't really have a choice. And so that's why it's such a serious decision.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, that is what ended up happening in the end. It's ironic for me looking back on it that in the 30 years I spent in Scientology, in my mind, I always thought, well, if I were ordered to disconnect from my mom or my sister or a family member, I would never do it. I would not comply. And I really believed that, though I was never ordered to, and I was never in that position. Nonetheless, the little voice in the back of my head who I had locked up in the closet back there, not to be listened to, was not in agreement with disconnection at all. So it's just kind of ironic that, it ended up being, I never did disconnect from my family. They disconnected from me.
Right. And that must have been so hard for you because, like you said, you weren't okay with that practice, and now it's being forced on you from the other direction.
Yeah. Yeah. What's most destructive about disconnection? Obviously, number one, destroying family bonds, requiring someone to have no contact with their family. I mean, that's not even applied to prisoners in prison. They still have contact with their families.
Yeah.
It's just a very destructive, absolute policy in Scientology that is dangerous because it isolates you from the people who care about you most. And then Scientology on top of that lies about it and says, oh, well, disconnection is a choice. No, it's not a choice at all. Any Scientologist knows it's not a choice. If you're told to disconnect, you follow the order. It's an order and you do it, or there's consequences, just like anything in Scientology. And then also Scientology has even gone so far as to lie about it, say, oh, disconnection doesn't exist. And that was a lie that was, on national television that probably resulted in half of Scientology leaving Scientology.
Really?
Yeah, they knew it was a lie. It was like, you can't lie about things like that. Just be honest and be open and, state what you believe and state what you practice. That's a big difference in Scientology than other religions is they don't state what they believe. They're not open. You have to move up the levels to learn
To
the
find
upper
out.
confidential. Yeah, exactly. It's a business model. They have a price list and you pay for counseling and courses as you go. It's a business.
Yeah, there was something similar that happened with Mormonism where the prophet went on a very popular TV show. I don't remember the name of it now, but he was asked very point blank a lot of questions, and the prophet lied on TV, and everyone was like, I can't believe he did that, because we're taught to be honest in our fellow dealings with man and all of the things. And the prophet basically just said later on, like, people don't need to know all of the ins and outs and they just won't understand. And all of us were like, wait a second.
Yeah.
So they do that now too. There's a like a Q&A thing on their website for people who are looking to join the church. And it has all of the hot button topics like, do Mormons believe they get their own planet after they die? Do you believe in dinosaurs? And they straight up lie. And they're like, we've never taught that you get your own planet. And we're like, that's not true. Like, I was taught that. My mom was taught that. All of us are sitting there like, we just learned that in Sunday school. You can't just straight up say on your website that that's not true, because you know it sounds crazy, and you know that investigating members will look at it and say, oh no, this is too much for me. And so that's what's so funny about it, is anytime there's information that sounds off just from like a regular critical standpoint, they will gaslight their members or they will lie about it until you get in further to where you can't leave anymore. You're in too deep.
Yes. Yes. Completely. And to me, just be honest. Believe whatever you want to believe. Hey, there's a lot of people that have crazy, crazy beliefs out there. You know what? I take no issue with that.
Yeah.
But don't lure innocent people in and lie.
Yeah.
Don't like present a false picture of, oh, we support families and we support unconditional love and all these things that are 100% false. Don't do that. That's not human.
Right. And another thing I wanted people to understand about joining the Sea Org, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, once you join, the classes become free, but it's still racking up this sort of debt. So if you were to leave, they could send you a bill. And that's another reason people are terrified to leave, because they don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to pay this bill back. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. So when you join the Sea organization, essentially you have layered in many layers of leverage and control that keep you in. And one of those, yes, you're absolutely right, that you are required to study 12 and a half hours a week as a member of the Sea organization, to continue doing training for your job and to do counseling in Scientology. Like you're required to continue your advancement in terms of your knowledge of Scientology, both from a job-specific training standpoint, but also going up the bridge to total freedom, to the levels of clear and the upper operating Thetan levels and counseling training and, they call it auditor training. So yes, every course that you do as a member of the Sea organization, you sign essentially an invoice that says there's no charge, but it's this cost. So if you ever leave, you're going to be required to pay that back. I can't remember what they call it. There's some term that they use for it, but it's, they're still documenting, they're still making you sign that, yes, I'm responsible for this. Hubbard has a policy called freeloaders. So he says, oh, you can't let members of the Sea organization do anything for free, because then they'll just turn around and leave. And they will have been freeloading.
Wow.
Getting a free ride, basically. I have a freeloader bill that's $96,000. So,
oh my gosh.
because I'd gotten up to the upper levels, Marc's was, I think, 68,000. So between the two of us, in rounding up, if we ever wanted to speak to our families again, just one of the steps we'd have to do would include paying $160,000 to Scientology.
Wow.
Can't make that up.
That is insane. I think what's crazy about all of this, though, is that he calls it a freeloader bill. But when you join the Sea Org, you are literally doing free labor. So,
Yes.
I mean, you get paid what, like $25 a week?
$46 a week for, if we were lucky. Pay would often get cut from the financial planning. So it wasn't a guarantee you would always get paid. But if we did get paid, it was supposed to be $46 a week. We're working 7 days a week, no vacations, no holidays, no days off, unless you have special approval to do so, which was very, very rare. Like in the 14 years I worked at the headquarters, I took 3 leaves of absence. One of them was 3 days to get married.
Oh.
And another one was to visit my family for 4 days over Christmas. And then the other one was to spend like 4 days with my grandma in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And even that was super, super painful. You have to get interrogated. You have to get approval from like 6 people to leave. You have to figure out who's going to do your work while you're gone. I mean, layer upon layer.
Jeez.
I would work anywhere from 16 hours a day to often staying up all night, or get 1 to 2 hours of sleep. For many years, that's kind of what I existed on, was barely any sleep, to the point that I had, anyway, we'll get to that, but it's mind numbing and not a good work environment.
How are you able to support yourself? Because at this point, are you still 14 and you're dropped in LA and you're making no money? Do they house you? Do they feed you? How are you able to survive on this?
So I was 16 when I joined the Sea Organization. Yeah. When you're a member of the Sea Organization, they provide uniform, lodging, and food.
Okay.
So really the $46 a week is supposed to just be for shampoo or basic supplies above and beyond. So it's not intended as a living wage, because they are paying for your costs, basically. But nonetheless, when I first started in the Sea Organization, I was in a dormitory in the big blue buildings, on L. Ron Hubbard Way, that most people in LA know what those are. So I was in a dormitory in there with like maybe 20 other women. It was like 3 bunk beds stacked high. And that's where I lived while I was doing the indoctrination program. And they call it the EPF, the Estates Project Force. And it's essentially heavy manual labor while you're also studying L. Ron Hubbard policies on the Sea Organization for 5 hours a day. And by the end of that, you're supposed to be programmed to be able to confront anything, do any job that's asked of you, and just get on with it, basically. No, don't ask any questions. You now know the basic ground rules for being a member of the Sea Organization. And at the end of that program, once you've completed all the requirements, they put you through what's called a fitness board, where they review and make sure you have met their requirements and that you're qualified now to go on and be a member of the Sea Organization.
Okay. So you're a teenager and you're expected to do all of these things. And you said you had recently had some life events that had caused you to sort of double down on your beliefs. So you're in it. What's going through your mind while you're in these dorms and you're working so hard? Is it exciting to you, or are you starting to feel stifled? How do you feel?
Yeah, I was absolutely feeling stifled, but also feeling trapped. So, I don't know. I think from being born into Scientology, I very quickly kind of adjusted to, well, it is what it is. Make the best of it. Kind of do what you got to do to survive was very much already strongly built into my mentality. Nonetheless, I remember a few times calling my mom from the payphone and just crying and being like, I just want to come home. And she was like, no, you could do this. You've got this. And I was like, I don't got this.
Yeah.
But I knew there were going to be some pretty harsh consequences if I backed out. So I just didn't feel that I had that as a realistic option. And of course, I didn't want to let my parents down. I didn't want to, be cut off from my friends and
Yeah.
have to pay a freeloader bill. And, it's really like within that world, it would be a huge black mark that I didn't think I would ever recover from it.
Mm-hmm.
Even had I just left and stayed in Scientology,
Right.
it would have been not good. Yeah. So I just kind of dove in head first and tried to push through. And I obviously did push through. Just within like 2 or 3 months, I was approached to move up to the headquarters. So Scientology has their headquarters in Gilman Hot Springs, California. It's a 500-acre secure compound in the middle of nowhere.
Is that the castle one?
Yes.
I've been to that.
Oh, you have?
I have. I was an actor in a few pieces way before I knew what Scientology was. And once I found out through the Aftermath show, I was like, never again will I ever act in one of those videos.
What?
Yeah.
What? What role did you play?
One of them, I think I was actually playing L. Ron Hubbard's mother as he was like a toddler. And then another one, I was yelling at my boss for something and yelling I quit. And then another one, I was looking in the mirror and thinking to myself, I'm always sick when it rains, because my mom used to say that to me. And then my daughter would end up saying that to herself. We did an episode with Mitch Brisker, and we haven't released it yet because we were waiting for the Scientology set to put it out. But yeah, I was talking to him about how it was such an efficient set. I was so shocked at how well everything went. I mean, I've been on massive movie sets and TV shows since living here, and it was so efficient. So anyways, I've been to the castle.
That's crazy. What year was that? Or what time period?
So it would have been it's when I first moved to LA, and I was just like scrapping for any acting job. I think it was like 2011 to 2013 maybe that I did that.
Wow. Do you remember Valerie?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's crazy. Oh,
yeah,
my
the casting
goodness.
director, right? She's the one that would review all the tapes and meet us when we got there.
Yeah, with the beautiful blonde jazz hair, my son calls it.
Yeah.
The curly, he's like, jazz hair.
So you worked there when you were 16.
Yep.
What was your job over there?
So, you have the road that runs through the property.
Yeah.
The castle that you're talking about was on the south side of the property. And then there were a bunch of different buildings on the north side of the property. You could see one from the highway that has a big, like, stained glass cross.
I don't remember that.
That was the staff training building. Like, that's where staff would go to do their 2.5 hours a day of training. And I was responsible for being the Scientology equivalent of a teacher, which is referred to as a supervisor. So I would be, in Scientology, when you're studying any course or doing any training, you have what's called a check sheet. And the check sheet is a list of steps like read this policy, write an essay about this, do a clay demonstration of this concept, like where you model it in clay, get a checkout on this reference where somebody will be like, what's the definition of this? What's the definition of this? Show me what this concept is all about. So I would be, the supervisor would just make sure that people were moving through their check sheets. And that's how you do a course in Scientology.
Okay.
So I did that for 5 years, for the first 5 years that I was at that property, from 1991 until 1996. And then in 1996 is when I was promoted up to Religious Technology Center, which is the highest ecclesiastical organization in Scientology that's run directly by David Miscavige himself.
Wow.
Yeah.
And where is that? Is that in Clearwater?
No, that's on that same property.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the time that I started working at that property, there were at least 5 different organizations that were kind of housed there, which is why it's referred to as the headquarters. Golden Era Productions is the organization I was working for originally, and that's the one that was making the movies, and that's where Valerie worked and so forth. But there were also several different management organizations, and then Religious Technology Center, also all at that property. So all the top executives in Scientology were housed at that property.
Okay. You're moving up. I'm wondering, I know there is lots of levels to Scientology, and you pay to play basically, and you move up the bridge, right?
Yep.
Because you had been in Scientology since you were a child and you'd been in these courses, were you further along than most people in that? Or like what level were you at this point at 21?
Yes. So by this time, I was what's called a class 4 auditor. So on the training side of the Bridge to Total Freedom, also referred to as the grade chart, it goes up to class 12. Like the highest level of auditor that you can be is a class 12. I was a class 4, which meant that I could do all of the, they call it grades auditing, like, basically get someone up to the level of almost to the state of clear. Let's just keep it simple.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I had been doing executive and management training, and I was a trained supervisor. I was what's called a cramming officer, which is like you correct people when they mess up on their posts. You say, oh, you didn't apply this L. Ron Hubbard policy, so let's find out what you don't understand about this policy and then fix it so that you do a better job. That's what a cramming officer is. So as a cramming officer. And then in terms of the counseling side, by this point, I had reached the state of clear. So then I was moved up into Religious Technology Center. And for the first year, I was sent down to Clearwater, Florida, where I was training to become a representative of Religious Technology Center. So what that means is that there were about 24 of us who were all in Religious Technology Center, and each of us were going to be sent to all the different organizations all over the world to be like the representative of David Miscavige at that organization. They referred to it as eyes and ears on the ground. The easiest concept to understand what Religious Technology Center is and does is really to understand that it's essentially the highest police organization in Scientology. So it's also referred to as the Inspector General Network, like Inspector General. That's a term taken from the real world, but kind of switched a little bit. So it's like, police, David Miscavige's eyes and ears on the ground, keeping an eye on everything, reporting to him about matters that he might be concerned about. For example, if a Scientologist were to go call the police on another Scientologist committing a crime against them, those kind of things would get reported to David Miscavige and Religious Technology Center directly because they are what's referred to as matters of RTC concern.
Okay, that's a lot.
Did I overwhelm you with information yet?
No, I'm just taking it all in. And I'm thinking that you must have felt pretty special to have this position. At this point, were you feeling okay with Scientology? Were you accepting it? Were you taking it in? Did it feel good to you to have such a high status?
So that's a good and fair question. I had resigned myself to my fate, and I just had decided, you know what? Dive in and make the best of it, like I said earlier. So when I was working in Golden Era Productions, I saw a lot of things that, many times we were staying up all night. And at some point in there, I thought, well, maybe if I push myself to get promoted up to Religious Technology Center, then maybe things will be better. Maybe it's just down here that's a miserable existence. And if I can work my way up the ranks, then
it'll be better, obviously.
Yeah, it'll be wonderful. And hey, David Miscavige is obviously the most ethical Scientologist. So everything must be wonderful up there. Yeah. I know. I should have listened to myself. I shouldn't have been convincing myself of this ridiculous path.
I don't blame you at all, because why would you? I mean, you are being taught all of these things, and so of course you would think that the people at the top are following these things, just like we thought the prophet of the church was never going to lie, and there he is on national television, and we're like, so I don't blame you at all for having these ideas. It makes total sense.
Yeah. I honestly was like, okay, I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to, commit to this path. Persistence on a given course. That's a Hubbard quote.
Okay.
Means you got to persist. And I will grant you that I can be very stubborn and very persistent. I do acknowledge that completely. So when I went all in, I really fought and worked hard for that. So now I'm in Religious Technology Center, and now all of a sudden major cracks start to form, because within the first week or two of being in Clearwater, Florida, now I was working very, very close with David Miscavige. And that was the first time that I personally witnessed him beating up top executives and yelling and screaming. And all of a sudden I was like, oh no, what have I done? This is not what I thought this was going to be.
Yeah.
But now I was in a position where I knew that the stakes were much higher. They weren't going to let me go. In fact, in later years, during my time in Religious Technology Center, during the time that I was working very, very closely with Shelise Miscavige, she told me on numerous occasions, when you're in Religious Technology Center, you have foregone your right to leave.
Whoa.
That was her exact statement. And I believed her, because I'd seen people from Religious Technology Center try to escape. And in fact, one woman was tracked all the way to South Africa and brought back.
Ooh, what's going through your mind at that point? Because I know that you just said you're totally invested, but when you see this stuff happen, is there kind of like an oh shit moment where you realize this is your life now forever?
Yeah, absolutely. It's weird when you say that. It's not that I had the thought that this is my life forever, because that would mean that I think, from my perspective, looking at it, just kind of evaluating, that would mean that I had chosen that. And I don't ever really feel that I had chosen it. So it's not that I thought this is going to be my life forever, but nor was I thinking I need to get the hell out of here. It was just kind of the day to day, just make it through this day and then make it to the next day. That was the perspective, more than, a resignation to the rest of my life or not.
Right.
It was much more struggle to survive level, not the high up, like, what am I doing here? Is this really what I wanted to be doing with my life? There's none of that when you're in that kind of a high control environment, because that, inserting logic or thinking for yourself, or even just having a critical thought, was strictly forbidden. And by that point, having immersed myself so thoroughly into the doctrine and belief of Scientology, it's very much smoke and mirrors. So I wouldn't let myself think I want to leave, because that would mean that I've committed crimes and I'm a bad person and I don't want to be here. And, and then that leads to, oh, well, but what about my husband? And if I talk to him about that, then that's definitely a suppressive act. And I'm definitely a suppressive person. You're not allowed to talk to somebody about leaving. There's a whole policy for that called leaving and leaves. It is a suppressive act to talk about with anybody wanting to leave.
What?
Yes.
Wow, they really just have it all dialed in to where people are too afraid to even think about it. That is wild to me. Okay, you said that you started having these cracks when you were married, but we haven't really talked about how you met, and is dating even allowed, and what are the policies around that?
Yes, good question. So I arrived to this headquarters in September 1991. And my husband, my to-be husband, Marc, was already working there. He, at the time, worked in the manufacturing area, doing quality control of cassette tapes at that time. There's no dating in the C organization. In fact, the policy is that you're not even allowed to engage in heavy petting, as they call it. Anything beyond a light kiss.
We had that term too.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. And all of us are like, what does that even mean?
Right. I know. This is funny that you say that, because as a teenager, who'd been growing up in you know, a high control environment and reading heavy petting, I go, so of course, like a good Scientologist, I go to the dictionary because I want to know, like, what am I going to get in really big trouble for, or what could I get away with?
Yeah.
And there's no heavy petting. It's not like it tells you. You can't find a list. Like, that's what I was looking for. I was like, please define the rules of engagement. If you're going to expect a teenager to not do something with a, you know, whatever. Honestly, originally I had these lofty thoughts like, oh, I'm going to marry some big high up executive, you know, whatever. Our paths somewhat crossed by accident. I mean, I knew who he was. We worked on a headquarters together but at that point there were probably around 1,000 staff there. Marc always jokes. He was like, yeah, it was slim pickings. It's like, whoever's there,
Marc,
pick one and move along. So it was kind of a funny accident. We had a few hours off for New Year's, and we lived in these apartments in town, like 20 minutes drive from the property, you know, still in dorm setup. So I lived in an apartment with, I think, 5 other women. One of them was my age. Anyway, my friend wanted to go see a movie, but we weren't allowed to go by ourselves. We had to have somebody to go with us. And so we went to an apartment where somebody that she had a crush on and was interested in lived. And Marc answered the door and he was like, oh, I'll go to the movie with you. And we were like, okay, great. Anyway, that was the first time we kind of spent any time together, which was kind of funny because we were so tired from having been in LA working at the New Year's event the night before that we honestly all slept through the whole movie.
That's so funny.
But anyway, so it kind of like, now I knew who he was. And by May of that year, we agreed to, you know, whatever you agree. I can't really say, there's just, you know, it's not like you can go out to movies or go for dinner or, you know, so we did a live a few months back with Aaron on growing up in Scientology. And it was just we were dying laughing because we talked about like our first date was driving to an event in LA on a bus.
Oh,
anyway,
man.
You have to watch that clip. It is pretty funny. I don't think I've laughed so hard in my whole life where that went to, but needless to say, pretty much right away, I mean, I loved Marc's sense of humor. I loved his rebelliousness. And it was so refreshing to me from having just grown up in that from such a young age and being honestly a rule follower and actually being terrified of breaking the rules. Mm-hmm. Marc was always kind of like the pushing the boundaries kind of a guy. And he started to make me take things less seriously. He has an amazing sense of humor. And so we decided to get married. From like first ride on the bus until we got married was maybe about 10 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So starting in May and we got married by mid-August. In fact, we're a week away from our 31st anniversary.
Congrats! That's amazing. What does a Scientology wedding look like? Are there rules?
Yes. So there are, I think, a couple of different ceremonies. Marc and I were married at Celebrity Center in Los Angeles. Yeah, we had to drive to Vegas, which his dad, my to-be father-in-law, drove us to Vegas the night before. We got our wedding license, and we had to do that because I was 17. Oh. And in California, if you want to get married under the age of 18, I think it is, you have to get blood drawn for some reason, and you have to see a psychologist. Oh. And I would have drawn the blood, but the psychologist was off the list for me as a Sea Org member and as a Scientologist. Right. Anyway, so yeah, we drove to Vegas, got our wedding license, and then the ceremony was in the pavilion there, and it was called the double ring ceremony. So the minister holds up the 2 rings and tells us to envision the ARC triangle in the rings. That's affinity, reality, and communication, which if you have all of those present, you can accomplish understanding. It's weird. There's not really the concept of love in Scientology. It's affinity. Affinity is a feeling of love or liking for someone. It's just a different word. Like a Scientologist would say, oh, I have so much affinity for you.
Really?
Yeah.
So wait, did you not say you loved each other? Was that not a thing?
No, not, I mean, yes, we said I love you. And of course we say it all the time now.
Yeah.
It's not that Scientologists don't say that. It's just that there's like all these layers of semantics that I feel in my mind now, looking back on it, were kind of layers of control and isolation, like, I can remember growing up, my mom would say to me all the time, don't cut my comm. So somebody listening would be like, what the heck was that? And what does that mean? Well, cut my communication. Again, you get so deep in the weeds, but if I say, it's like saying, don't interrupt me, basically, but it's Scientology speak.
Got it.
Or they'd say, don't be banky. As a child, don't be banky means your bank is your reactive bank or your reactive mind, and it's the source of any misemotion, negative feelings, negative reactions. And that's what you handle when you achieve the state of clear. You now no longer have a reactive mind or a reactive bank. But so as a child is like, don't be banky, meaning, don't throw a fit, don't act out. It's a different language that controls you and convinces you and reinforces the belief system of Scientology with every single word.
Yeah.
I was realizing this recently. Blown for Good, the reason Marc named his book that, in Scientology, if you're blown, it means it's an unauthorized departure. And if you blow, it's because you've committed crimes and therefore you need to get yourself away. But still, it's all about what you did, not anything else. So no matter what the reason, if you blow or leave without authorization, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Marc actually started posting originally anonymously back in 2006 as Blown for Good. Like he's blown for good. He's not coming back. Anyway.
I like that little side note.
I don't know where I was going with all that, but it was, my main point is the controlling use of the language to reinforce and just keep you in it.
Yeah. And we were talking about how it's kind of a loveless ceremony. And I know that you're not allowed to feel what they perceive to be negative emotions like sadness or anger. I imagine that would be really difficult in a marriage because there's always going to be things where you clash and you need to work stuff out. How did you handle that within your marriage if you're not allowed to have those feelings?
Yeah. It's not really accurate to say it's a marriage because first of all, yes, you sleep in the same bed, but like we were on completely different schedules. We were on completely different meal times. We rarely ever saw each other. So there wasn't a whole lot of time for us to have to work through relationship issues. It was more just like, a struggle to even see each other. Like more, we had, the organization provided us with these Nextel phone radios to communicate with other people on the property. I make that clear because not that we had phones, but we had a means to communicate to each other. So even though I was in a higher organization, I had a radio and I could radio Marc. So we even had a higher level sometimes of communication than other couples did who didn't have those. But like Marc we had this running joke. I would radio him and say, hey, what time are you going? And he's like, oh, I got a date tonight. I'm like, what? It's like with Lionel, all night long. He's staying up all night.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Yeah, Marc's humor is honestly probably at least 80% of why our marriage survived all of that craziness.
That's really sweet, actually. I'm surprised that they were supportive of you getting married at such a young age, especially if they don't allow children in the Sea Org. And I'm wondering, were you aware of your mom's situation? I know that you know now that they kind of gave her that ultimatum, like you're the last person to be able to have a baby. But were you aware of that situation? And did you want kids? How were you feeling about that?
Yeah, no, I always wanted kids. But the thing is when you're 16, you know, and speaking for myself, like when I joined this organization, I wasn't married. I wasn't an adult, you know, so I kind of just thought, well, I'll figure it out. Or I didn't even have that much of a thought. It was just path of least resistance. You know, you don't, I mean, I couldn't tell you what would be happening at the end of the year, let alone the rest of my life or a billion years as I was required to commit to. You know, you just, I don't know. It was just kind of a take it by day thing. So prior to getting to the headquarters, I believed that there was a policy where a member of the Sea organization, if they became pregnant, would be sent to a lower level organization, not in the Sea organization, to have the baby. And then when the child was then 6 years old, they would go back. I somewhat thought that that was a thing, though I'd never seen it happen. I just didn't realize until I got to the headquarters that the level at which they would frankly pummel women, just like emotionally, heavy manual labor, et cetera, if somebody became pregnant until they reached their breaking point and agreed to terminate and were forced to do so. We had a lawsuit and that was one of the causes of action, was that I was forced to do that twice.
Oh no.
And in that lawsuit, I made a list of every single woman that I personally knew had been forced to do that. And my list was 70 women long. Some of those had been forced to do it up to 6 times.
No. Oh my gosh, that's awful.
It is. It's absolutely, and on this isolated property, they have complete control over you. So if you put up a fight, quite literally, you have nowhere to go. It's not like you can jump the fence and run for miles to where.
Yeah.
And I knew that, part of that, the steps that would get enacted when a woman would become pregnant would be to separate them from their husband. Like I said, put them on heavy manual labor, put them on interrogation and ethics handlings to make them realize that they're a bad person, they can't leave, and just literally break them.
Wow, I can't even imagine. That is so awful that they would be forced to do that. Was there anyone who tried to hide that they were pregnant?
Yes, there were a few people that did. One lady in specific that I remember, she hid it until she was 6 months pregnant, and they then forced her to, which was absolutely criminal.
Wait, they forced her to abort a 6-month baby?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
No.
I know. And so Megan Shields was a Scientologist doctor in Los Angeles, and she made a huge stink about that, reporting it all the way up to David Miscavige that this was criminal. It was,
unethical. For
all intents and purposes, murder.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my experience was that it was 1994. I was not yet in Religious Technology Center, but I was working at that headquarters, and I found out I was pregnant, and I literally was absolutely terrified, devastated, heartbroken, like just everything. Like it was seriously one of the worst moments of my life, because I was in this massive conflict that I wanted nothing more, and yet I knew that I was not going to be allowed to get out of there. I had nowhere to go. Yeah. Like, talk about complete desperation. They would literally just destroy my marriage to my husband. So what should have been joyful celebration moment was complete terrifying fear, and the isolation was such that it's not like I could just go to the drugstore and find out by myself what was going on. I had to go to the medical person and say, I need to buy a pregnancy test. And so I had to pay for it. And, of out of my $46. So now the cat's out of the bag already. And so she sat there while I took the test. So it's not like I could keep it a secret.
Yeah.
Let's see, 94, I was 19 at this point. I had been married for 2 years. So instantly it was like, so we're going to take you to the Planned Parenthood clinic. This is what's going to happen. And I was just besides myself. But again, the fear and the control and the leverage that they have over you is so complete. Mm-hmm. There's no way out. Mm-hmm. As much as I wanted to sit there and scream, they just instantly kick into, this is what's going to happen next. You're going to get escorted here. You're going to talk to these people. You're going to tell them that this is what you've decided. So they had me escorted there by this 6-foot Australian guy who was my boss, basically. And he sat in the waiting room. And every ounce of my being was like, wanted to scream.
Yeah.
And, they about near broke me at the Planned Parenthood when they were like, where's your husband? And I'm just like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. That is not okay. And I know that you know that. It's just,
I know.
Wow, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it was, I don't know. It did break me, but then I go, my view now is what breaks you, it breaks and it grows back stronger,
Yeah.
It's a big part of why I do what I do. And, nobody should have to go through that. It's just not. So
yeah,
it's sometimes a struggle, and I have to, try to remember to grant myself some forgiveness. And
of course.
Yeah.
Of course, because that was not your fault and you had no choice and you were a victim of something awful and horrible. And I hope you never blame yourself for that, even though I'm sure it's really difficult.
Yeah, I do. I'll be honest. But, many people have said very kind things. And, I know obviously I can't turn back time. And I go, everything happens for a reason. And from my experiences, I've now very broadly spoken on this topic, and I've made it much, much harder for them to continue that practice. I know they still do, but I also know of many people that were able to leave who previously would have been forced to do the same thing. So that gives me some peace that, however many babies have been born because of my pain, then I take that as a blessing.
Oh, wow. It's amazing that you're able to do that and help so many people. Oh, just my heart goes out to you. I'm just having all the feels right now. I'm trying not to lose it myself because it's
okay.
I'm just so sorry. So maybe let's move on then to when you got to the Religious Technology Center, and what were the things you had mentioned? This is where you started to notice breaks and cracks in what was going on in your life. So what were those things? What was the catalyst that started to get you to think a little bit more clearly?
Yeah, well, first of all, now I was working directly with David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, and seeing him physically abuse top executives on a regular basis was shocking. You just go, wow, I did not think that this kind of thing went on. In that Scientology mindset. You go, well, this is off policy. This is not right. Still in the mindset, but also in your heart, you start to go, well, these people are here trying to clear the planet. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to help. And yet this is happening. The cognitive dissonance in Scientology that kicks in is, well, that person did something wrong. They're not performing their job. So therefore they're pulling it in. Like, Scientology does not believe that there's such a thing as a victim. That's a negative thing. If you're a victim, it means you're succumbing, you're tending towards death. That's the opposite of what is expected of a Scientologist, according to L. Ron Hubbard. But it becomes harder and harder and harder to rationalize and shut it out and just not start to go, wow, what is going on here? But again, being in such an isolated compound, again, what am I going to do? Jump the fence and run through the desert for miles and miles and miles to the nearest payphone for which I have no money?
Right.
Like, let's just talk logistics for a moment. It was not like, it's not like I had a car or, any family connections outside of Scientology. I had family outside of Scientology, but I hadn't talked to them by this point in like 25 years. So why would I expect that I had anywhere to go? So again, you just feel completely trapped and completely helpless to do anything. And then on top of that, the indoctrination just constantly is washing over you, going, no, just, do your job, get it done. These people, they're getting what they deserve. David Miscavige is putting their ethics in or whatever. It's Hubbard policy too. There are pieces of it that he would say, well, that's what I was doing, which is, for example, one of the policies is you make the punishments too gruesome to be faced and enforce them as a means of obtaining compliance. So in other words, if somebody's not doing their job or not acting as is expected of them, then they're supposed to be given very, very harsh punishments that are too gruesome to be faced. And there were many of those. So yeah, I spent a year in Clearwater, Florida. Then I was brought back to the headquarters, and that's where I was attending sometimes daily meetings that David Miscavige would hold with all the management executives. So I got to see up close and personal, consistent verbal and physical abuse of some really good people, frankly. And by this point, I was just like completely just trying to survive and not become the target of his wrath myself. And of course, by this point, Marc was an executive in Golden Era Productions. So he would very often, sometimes he'd be doing great, but sometimes he'd also be in a lot of trouble. So actually, over a period of about 5 years, David Miscavige was constantly pressuring me to divorce Marc, specifically and personally.
Wow.
And yeah, there was a time in 2000 when I was in a meeting with David Miscavige, Shelise Miscavige, and 3 other executives in Religious Technology Center. And he said to me, so did you hear about the new personnel policy I'm implementing for Religious Technology Center? And I said, yes, sir. He's like, what is it? And I said, well, it's that you can only be married to someone else who's also in Religious Technology Center. So he knew full well, like this applies to me because Marc was in a lower organization than me. So essentially to my face, he's saying, if you don't divorce your husband, I'm kicking you out.
What?
Yeah.
How are you reacting right now? Was this one of your final straws?
I wish. I just, again, like I said, so this was in 2000. By the time I finally escaped was January 2005. So it was, getting there. But again, factor this in with Shelise Miscavige telling me, oh, you've forgone the right to leave, all of this, like if the thought even crossed my mind, which, I can't even say it was so much as a direct thought that I allowed myself to have, but I do remember that there were so many times that I had nightmares about trying to escape. And I should tell you that I'm very much a dream problem solver or a problem solver dreamer. Like I have actually, this is going to sound crazy, completely crazy, but we were trying to help get somebody out of Scientology. And I had a dream of how to do it and we did it and it worked.
That's amazing. I love that so much. I love that so much.
Somebody recently was like, you should really put that to work. I know somebody who like lays out their problems and then goes to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so I would have nightmares about trying to escape. And that was the closest manifestation that I would allow myself to have that I wanted to get out of there. And even then, I wouldn't say to anybody that I had those dreams. Like even when I was, getting counseling or interrogated or whatever, I was like, in my head, I'm like, it was just a dream.
Right.
It's theoretical. It's not even a real thing.
Yeah. It doesn't count.
Because it would be like, have you had thoughts of leaving? That would be an example of a question you'd be interrogated about.
Yeah.
If you thought about leaving, and I'm like, well, it's a dream. It doesn't count as a thought, right?
Doesn't count.
And so by now, at this time, so in 2000, now is number 3. Like my position was internal exec. I reported to Marty Rathbun and to David Miscavige. They were my direct bosses. So I felt that I had gotten to an irreversible spot where I didn't know how I could ever get out. I didn't know how they'd ever let me leave. They would pursue me and bring me back, which as they eventually did do, though they failed to bring me back eventually. But nonetheless, I just didn't feel like I had any options. And even more so, the challenge was my husband.
Yeah. It's
hard enough for one person to get out of there. For 2 people to get out, that's pretty much unheard of. Like, statistically, the amount of couples that have made it out of there is, like Marc and I are a statistical anomaly in that scenario.
Did they make you divorce him, or how did you get around that?
They were pressuring me to divorce him, every few months. And I just ignored it. Frankly, I non-complied, but I was very, very worried about it. And at one point, Marc accidentally found out that this was in the works. Shelise Miscavige handed Marc some internal papers when she had to run out from a meeting. And he, of course, being the rebel that he is, looked through them. And it was a whole listing of everyone in Religious Technology Center. And it said where they were going to be moved to. And by my name, it said I was going to be moved to the next organization down. And by the reason, it said Marc.
Oh, geez.
And from that point forward, he would always ask me, like, are you going to divorce me? And but he told me why. I was like, no, I'm not. Please stop saying that. Please stop asking me that. It was, really upsetting because, frankly, because I was under so much pressure that I had considered crumbling to the pressure, which made it even more upsetting when he was like, are you going to divorce me? I just flat out refused. And then I ended up in the hole as a result of that.
You did. Can you tell everybody what that means? Yep.
So it was these double wide trailers on the property where all the management executives were essentially being they were locked up, not allowed to leave. To my knowledge, there's probably still some version of that in play today, probably not in those same buildings because there's been so many people talk about it. Like Mike Rinder was there for 2 years after I left. It was bad when I was there, but it got significantly worse, like absolutely worse. Everyone that was in the hole was essentially being accused of non-performing and having counter-intention to David Miscavige and not wanting Scientology to survive or prevail or whatever. And so the reason I was put there is because I refused to divorce Marc, and then I was not allowed to go home anymore. I was sleeping on the floor of my office in a sleeping bag. Anyway, it was a complete nightmare. And by that point, in that time period was when in my mind, I was like, well, I was in Religious Technology Center where I had forgone my right to leave. And now, because I refused to divorce my husband, now I'm in even bigger trouble, but I'm not in Religious Technology Center anymore. So perhaps, just started to be like, but still the biggest problem was my husband. And I didn't trust myself to talk with him about it.
Oh, because he would have to write a knowledge report on you.
Yes. And vice versa,
Right.
And we were getting regularly interrogated. So I didn't want to kind of like
out yourself,
unintentionally spill the beans either. So it was a hot mess. And so it culminated in Marc being falsely accused of embezzling funds from Scientology. I mean, even that was just so ridiculous. He was supposed to purchase equipment to get something done that David Miscavige wanted done. There were no funds to do that, so he couldn't get it done, so he was getting in trouble. He found out that they were throwing away these very old projectors in Los Angeles, and he was like, stop. They can be sold on eBay for a lot of money. And he got written approval to sell those to make the money that he needed to buy the equipment to make the systems that David Miscavige needed. But he didn't include and document that there were going to be eBay fees deducted from those sales. So those eBay fees are the basis of their alleged, accusation that he embezzled money.
Oh, wow.
So he was getting interrogated. They told him they were going to send him to the Rehabilitation Project Force in Los Angeles, which meant he would never see me again. And the next day, he took off on his motorcycle. This was early January 2005 now. He had tried to call me. He'd radioed me that night, like around 4:00 in the morning, and said, "Are you coming home?" And I said, I don't know. I'm working. I'm going to try and come home just to take a shower. I never made it home. So, I can speculate on how I would have reacted. And honestly, it's neither here nor there because he took off.
Yeah.
But the sad part that just epitomizes what that life was like is that there was a security guard sitting right outside the house that we lived on, which was right on the border of the headquarters property. So it was outside the perimeter, but right there was a camera on top of our house. And so Marc drove off on his motorcycle, and right away there was a security guard following him immediately. He didn't make it. He probably made it about a mile and a half, and they ran him off the road. But a passerby saw this happen and called 911.
Wow.
And thank goodness, Riverside County Sheriff's Office responded, and they, for all that, I wish law enforcement would do more. I've personally told Riverside County Sheriff's Office I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for them responding to that call and understanding that my husband was trying to escape from that property and helping him to do so. Mm-hmm. There was a woman in charge of the responding officers that we found out later adamantly insisted a report be filed, even though Marc was not pressing charges. He just wanted to get the heck out of there. And the sole reason she insisted that report be written is because she could see that he was married to me and that I was still there.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And then what happened? I'm like on the edge of my seat. I'm like, and then?
Yes. And then? So he was run off the road, and the police responded, and they put the pieces together really quickly. Marc was not saying anything negative because we're just trying to get the heck out of there. We're not trying to make this a big war against Scientology. And so the police ended up escorting him to U-Haul. He called his dad. His dad answered the phone. His dad was the sweetest person. He, for the whole time that we were at that property, he had a 1-800 number set up for Marc and his sister Stephanie, so that if they ever needed to call him for anything, they could do it. It was just unbelievable. And he was there, and he answered, and he was the reason Marc, was able to get out. And but then of course I was still there. Mm-hmm. So the next 3 weeks were absolutely the worst 3 weeks of my life. That's what I'm starting what I wrote for the beginning part of my book is explaining the absolute hell I went through in those 3 weeks. I was already in a mess. I had lost so much weight. It was pathetic. By that point, I couldn't stop losing weight. I was like 95 pounds. I'm 5'7".
Oh my gosh.
In fact, at one point during those 3 weeks, in the middle of the night, David Miscavige came down and was walking through the hole. And he looked at me and he was like, "You're sick." And I'm like, "Yes, sir."
Yeah. And
like, and in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm sick of this place.
yeah.
But it was still a little bit after that, but not that long after that I did manage to escape. I figured out a very elaborate way to be able to contact Marc on the down low, which was really, really difficult. But I essentially got my sister, who was just a civilian Scientologist in Los Angeles. She was a college student. And I called her and I just made up this whole story about how Marc was on a special project because I was not allowed to tell them that he had escaped. So I said he was on a special project and that just tell him that I miss him and to please call me at 6 a.m. the next day. Because, yeah, that sounds totally not suspicious, right? But she did. And he called and I just told him, I cannot do this. I'm literally going to die if I stay here. And by that point, I had actually thoroughly reached that certainty. I was not going to make it if I stayed there. Mm-hmm. And so then it was then it was a matter of figuring out the complicated logistics of how to get out of there because I knew that I was in no state for physical confrontation. Like not only was I skin and bones, like 25 pounds less or 20 pounds less than I weigh right now, but I just like mentally, I couldn't take confrontation. I knew I would fail because, let's face it, I had been born into this high control group and it's the only thing I'd ever known. And so not only would they be saying all the right things to make my mind keep me there, but also just physically, I wouldn't be able to get away. Mm-hmm. So long story short, I went to this eye doctor appointment. I had a security escort with me. I had to ditch her and go to a cab that I'd called early that morning under an assumed name of Barbara Smith. Will be etched in. So stupid. It's not even a creative name. I mean, come on. Barbara Smith. Like, wow, Clara, that was genius.
It worked though, so.
Yeah, it did. It's kind of funny. But so I got in the cab at the Walmart before I was even out of the parking lot. The security escort who just dropped me off at the front while she went to go park the car. That's how I ditched her. I was like, oh, it's my appointment right now. So just let me out right now. I'm going to be late. And she fell for it. So I walked into the Walmart, walked right across quick as I could without running. Cause in my mind, again, I was like, I can't run. Cause then, you have this like playing out in your head, like, there's going to be people chasing after me, like, where'd she go? And they're like you see in the movies, oh, she ran that way. And you're like, no, don't run. Walk fast. Yeah. So I'm in the cab. We had agreed that he would call me at a certain time, by which point I should be in the cab and that he would tell me what to do from there. Cause I had ultimately come to the conclusion I couldn't do this without his help from the outside. And that's why I figured out very complicated means of getting in touch with him. So anyway, the security person radioed me and I was like, oh, I'm just in the bathroom. I'll be right there. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, man, this cab driver must think I'm a real piece of work.
Oh no.
But we kept driving. We made it to the Riverside bus station and I called Marc from a payphone there and it was like all these complicated instructions. He was like, turn on your phone and call this company in Times Square, New York, because then they'll think you're heading to New York. Uh-huh. But then turn off your phone and do not, under any circumstances, turn it back on, no matter what you do. So I was like, okay. So I made it to Barstow. In Barstow, I was supposed to call him from a payphone, but that's where I panicked because, I haven't been out in the real world. I'm just like this, grew up in a cult. I have no idea how the world works. Yeah. So I went to the payphone and it didn't accept coins. It only accepted calling cards.
Oh my gosh.
And I just shut down. I was like, I don't know what to do. I mean, it's so stupid in retrospect, but it does point to the mindset that I was in. Like, I can't ask someone for a calling card. That's going to be like asking somebody what planet you're on.
Yeah.
They're going to think I'm Starman. And when the PIs come, they'll be like, oh yeah, she went that way again. This is what's going through my head. So anyway, I turned my phone on and I called Marc and he was like, what are you doing? Now they're going to know. I'm like, okay, well, I panicked and da, da, da. And of course, so he gives me the ticket number. That's what I really needed to call him for, to get from Barstow, California to Kansas City, Missouri on a Greyhound bus. So they wouldn't be able to intercept me. There's no airline tickets. It was supposed to be a flawless plan. But because I turned the phone on, they could ping it off a cell tower so they would know. And they're very, very good at figuring out like where the person is and then what transport is heading where. And, it's just a matter of like checking off the boxes. Like, okay, there's a bus going from here to here. She's going to be obviously going to where Marc is. So yeah, by the time I got to Vegas, 5 p.m., it was January. So it was already dark outside. I knew I had to get off the bus because it was a bus change. So I absolutely had to get off the bus. I waited until almost everybody was off the bus. I was completely famished. Mm-hmm. All I was thinking about was, I could go get a cheeseburger at McDonald's. I haven't eaten anything in days. I get off the bus, open the door to the bus station, and boom, they're there right in front of me to take me back.
Oh, no.
So there were 2 people in the bus station, top executive I'd worked with for 14 years, Greg Wilhare, who was like David Miscavige's right-hand man, and Sharon Johnston, who was my boss at the time. And then there were 2 other people in the parking lot. I was just like, now what do I do? Walked into the bus station. In retrospect, it should have been I don't know, people go, well, why didn't you just call 911? But again, you have to understand, like 30 years of programming, that 911 is the last thing a Scientologist is ever going to do. That's the enemy.
Yeah.
You do not call the authorities ever under any circumstances. So, I just set my purse down on the floor, sat down on it, and I just decided in my mind I was just going to plug my ears. And if they tried to physically haul me out of there, which was a very real possibility in my mind, that I would just scream and hopefully somebody might do something. Not the most elaborate planning, but it was on the spot. So meanwhile, they're talking to me. They're like telling me that my whole family's going to be ruined. I'm destroying their lives. Then they get Marc on the phone and they tell him that they caught me and I'm not coming. And Marc is losing his mind. Anyway, they threatened to follow me on the bus, all kinds of things. Anyway, so that went on for about 20, 30 minutes. At this point, honestly, they'd already followed me across state lines.
Right.
From California to Nevada, chasing me, basically. Not even basically, that's what they were doing. They were hunting me down to bring me back. Told my husband they caught me and they're bringing me back. So I just somehow made it through that whole thing and got on the bus. And the first thing I did the second I sat down on the bus is turned on my phone because obviously
it doesn't matter
they
now.
know where I am now.
Yeah.
So I called Marc and he was like, oh my God, what's happened? And so the rest is history. Here I am today.
Lordy, Claire, that is straight out of a movie. It's so much that they would be willing to go to those lengths. And I don't think a lot of people know about this stuff, that they are literally trapped. It is so intense. And wow, I'm just so happy that you're willing to speak out and spread awareness about this because honestly, I didn't know what was going on. Like I said, I did acting gigs for them because I didn't know any better until I saw the aftermath. And I was like, what the hell? This is crazy. How come nobody knows about this?
Right.
And so it's just a lot. I'm so happy you escaped. Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine like that moment when you must have reunited with Marc. It just was probably fireworks and just the relief. How did you feel when you finally got there?
Oh, it was absolutely amazing. It was what you feel like when it's the first day of the rest of your life after living through 30 years of hell by that point. Yes, I was just so grateful that I succeeded and that I was with my husband, who I love, and that somehow, despite all those years of hell, we could start over. It was just absolutely incredible. And that's what drives my passion for my work with the Aftermath Foundation. I've been serving as the treasurer since its formation in December 2017, and then recently was voted in as president. It's just so important that people have resources and have a safety net, and have people they can talk to who understand what they've been through, and all of that we never had. It was for me, when I escaped, it was quite literally like being told, you know what, see that cliff right there? Just go run, toddle along, jump off the cliff. I promise, Marc's at the bottom. Things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
We promise. Just trust me.
I bet the mental deconstruction was so incredibly difficult because of the way that they changed all of your vocabulary and made you think in a very specific way and made you act in a very specific way. It was probably, from what I know about my own deconstruction process, that was not nearly as difficult. It was probably so liberating, but also so confusing and tiring and just hard to unwind all of that programming.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely a significant process that you have to be willing to really work through. It's interesting that, obviously in the years since we escaped and just starting over and kind of starting to speak out and tell people the truth about Scientology, we met this one person that told us that there was this whole study done about how long it takes to undo that high control group programming and indoctrination. And this study showed that, it's definitely always a process, but Scientology is like 3 times longer.
I'm sure.
Which made a lot of sense to me. I was like, yeah, you have to, it is layers of the onion, and you really have to pause to go, why am I thinking this? Is this because this is how I feel? Or is this because this is how I was told to feel? And you have to be really careful to not kind of dig yourself back into it, but walk yourself out of it. And education is key. I've read many books, and Jehovah's Witness, for example, one time showed up on our front door in Burbank, California. And unfortunately for them, I was alone with my 2 kids. Marc was out of town. I was used to being bombarded by private investigators. When such was the case, they would very specifically catch me alone with my young kids. I hadn't had any coffee yet. And so I opened the door, and they were like, started their pitch. And I was like, I was in a cult for 30 years. And I just slammed the door in their face. I'm like, sorry, that wasn't my smoothest, most gracious conversation ever, but no, the answer is no.
Yeah. They were trying to recruit you, a Jehovah's Witness trying to recruit you.
Yep.
Yeah. That's tough. I still have a hard time with that. I am at the point now, because I'm in this space and I do this work, that if someone tries to recruit me into a religion, I'm like, I'm set. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm good. Wow. I'm just trying to imagine what it must have been like when you're able to have a real, not real, but like a worldly marriage again, like have some sort of normalcy in your lives and having kids. And that must have been quite the transition to kind of figure all of that out together.
Yes, completely. It's been a path of building a new life, recovering, recognizing trauma, advocacy for other victims. I just have such conviction that anybody can leave. Anybody can start over. Anyone can take control of their life at any moment. You just have to know that you're doing the right thing for yourself, and have that strength and just knowledge that it's going to be okay. It's going to sort itself out. Commit to your path, but do commit to it, because to me, I'm just so grateful that I didn't fail myself in my moment of need, because I really easily could have.
Yeah, it takes a lot of strength and bravery and courage and self-advocacy to put your foot down and say no. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people have to learn, including myself, when leaving high demand religions or cults, is that you have to learn how to say no to people and set boundaries, because for so long you've been a yes man. Whatever you need. Okay, you want me to do this? I'll do that. This is the new doctrine. Okay, that's how I'm going to live now. And you're just used to giving away your power. And so you have to be able to say, no, this is what I want. This is what I need. These are my boundaries. If you don't like it, you can go elsewhere.
Yes.
It's so hard to do that. It takes a long time. I'm still working on it. I'm still working on being able to set boundaries. It's
totally
hard.
am.
Yeah, it's hard.
I totally am. And I would also add to that, it's really important to have those moments where you go, no, I am not okay.
Yeah.
I am not okay. What I lived through was not okay. And I need to recover from that. And I need to help other people recover from that.
Mm-hmm.
That's to be part of it too. Because in Scientology, it's all like, oh, well, you've handled that and you're not, no.
Yeah.
I had this moment when we were in the middle of our lawsuit, where one day I was driving my kids to the preschool, and I had been going through very intense deposition with Scientology, which was very triggering. It was like going back to your abuser, essentially. And I just started bawling my eyes out. And in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I don't want my kids to see I'm upset. And so I was just like, you know what, to hell with it. I am going to see a therapist, and I will decide if this helps me or doesn't help me.
Yeah.
Yes, Scientology says it's evil, but that is my choice.
Yeah.
I can decide. And so I took that power back, and it was so amazing, because then I was talking to the therapist, and she's like, well, why were you upset? And I was like, well, I didn't want my kids to see that I was upset. And she's like, but why not? I'm like, well, because then they're going to be sad. And she's like, it's okay for your kids to know that you have emotions. And actually, it's a good teaching moment, because then they'll be like, you know what? I'm having a tough day, but I'm going to be okay. And it's good it's healthy for kids to learn that. It's not the end of the world that I'm crying or that I'm upset about something, because I will be better in just a little bit, Anyway, it was so funny, because my 3-year-old, like a few days after we had this wonderful conversation, after I'd had this therapy, my son says, Mom, I think Dad's having a rough day. And I'm like, you know what? You're right, but he's going to be fine.
Oh, that's
just,
so sweet.
And it was important for me to work through that and just realize, there are going to be tough days. I have to do the work, as they say, and I'm still getting there too. It's a heck of a process.
Yeah. And how are you doing now? What is your consciousness, your awareness? What makes you happy? I know the advocacy work, and you can talk about that, and please do. Is there anything else that makes you light up and feel at peace?
Yes, absolutely. I hike up a mountain every day. If you saw the 60 Minutes Australia piece that Marc and I did, it's actually shown in there. This 200 steps up a mountain. From the top, you can see Pikes Peak, Sleeping Indian, their mountain ranges. And
so cool.
They are, oh my gosh, it is. I go there and I just take 30 minutes for myself, and I enjoy that. I get so much peace from it. It's like my own form of meditation, prayer, whatever it is. It's my own special flavor, because I don't like associating things with labels.
I don't blame you.
Yeah. And it just, that's where I do all my problem solving outside of my dreams. And I work through things, and I just love it so much. And we have vacations with our kids and with our family of choice. We have very specifically chosen people that love us unconditionally. I'm so grateful that we've been able to build that for our kids. And, our kids know that they're not actually grandma, or they're not actually whatever, but it doesn't matter, because we tell our kids, what most matters is unconditional love, that these are people that accept you for what you are. They love you and they support you. And, they're pretty damn good at it too. Wouldn't you agree? I say that to my kids and they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. They're amazing.
That's so sweet. How old are they now?
So I have 3 boys. They're 17, 15, and 10.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And so my husband and I are both, have worked with the Aftermath Foundation, like I said, since December 2017 or January 2018 when it was formed. And we help people escape and start their lives over again. And it's just so rewarding. Like I've taught a 45-year-old woman how to drive at the same time that I was teaching my teenager to drive.
So cool.
Yeah, no, it is amazing to be able to do that. It's such a blessing to be able to help other people and know the position that they're in and know that we can absolutely honestly tell them it's going to be okay. Your life is your own. You have the power to take back your path. And so we recently put out a documentary called The Story of Serge Obolensky.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw that, but it's an incredibly powerful story about someone who grew up in Scientology. His life was completely destroyed to the point he ended up homeless on Hollywood Boulevard for 10 years. My kids and I and Marc all just attended his high school graduation in June in Los Angeles, which was incredible. I couldn't stop crying. It was like, that moment when you just go, wow, this is just so powerful.
Yeah. I was able to watch part of that and I haven't yet finished it, but just from the beginning, I think I got about halfway through. It's such a beautiful story of perseverance and people stepping up to the plate to help this man and get him back on track. And I just love that you're able to do that through the foundation. And if people want to donate to the foundation or become a supporter or a volunteer, how can they do that?
Yes. So the website is theaftermathfoundation.org. So the word the. And on there is the email contact for a volunteer. So it's volunteer@theaftermathfoundation.org is the email to contact to sign up as a volunteer. We have an incredible database of just the most kind, amazing volunteers, and we're incredibly grateful for that. And then, we're actually about to relaunch the website with a complete makeover. So that will be coming soon. But yes, that's where there's more information.
Awesome. Well, I am just so happy that you're able to do that. And I totally support the work that you guys are doing. And please let me know if there's any way that I can help you guys as well. And I know we were going to talk about the Masterson trial, but we've already gone so long. So maybe that's another episode. I don't know.
Let's
Claire,
do it. Yes.
I could just talk to you all day. This has been so
Likewise.
great. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's been incredible to learn more about you because I've seen you from afar for so long. And so knowing more of your story is just a privilege. And so thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time too.
Yeah. And let's drop all of your handles. So Blown for Good is YouTube. And then give us anything else that you want to plug.
Yes, blownforgood.com is our website where Marc's book is available for purchase. The aftermathfoundation.org is the foundation website. The spshop.com is where we have Mike Rinder bobbleheads and SP bracelets, and all the proceeds from those benefit the Aftermath Foundation. And I think that's good.
Amazing. Before we go, I just need your Linda Listen moment, sassy statement, or inspirational statement for our viewers.
Oh, that's a good one now. So we did the one before. Linda Listen. Always believe in yourself. You got this. You can do this. You can do very hard things. Don't ever give up on yourself. You're your best advocate.
Amen. I love it. So good. Thank you so much for sharing. It's been awesome. Do you have any final thoughts before we go?
No, just again, thank you so much for everything you do. I would like to pose one question to you. You don't have to answer right away.
Okay.
I would love to know if there's a book or something that for you helped you to just open up your mind, like the baby steps to receiving truth
That is such a good question. And I would have to say it was not one specific thing. It was learning as much as I could about everything. So especially learning about the ins and outs of Mormonism helped me understand that it's just made up.
Yes.
And once I was able to deconstruct the religious side of things, it gave me permission to be free in thought and to not feel guilt and shame anymore. And it helped me understand that sometimes these groups are created and they are just made to control and manipulate people. And of course, bring love. I mean, I don't think they all have malicious intent. I think they mean well, mostly.
Yes.
But ultimately, there's some harm there. And so once I was able to recognize and kind of separate those things, I was able to let myself be free. And I think just living my life to my fullest in the way that makes me happy and following my own intuition and really just reconnecting with myself. And I'm an advocate for plant medicine, so like psilocybin or like gummies or something, nothing crazy.
Yeah.
But, and also I have to say, it's not like all of the time, it's maybe once a year. But I really give that time to myself to do some introspection and see what I want to work on, to see what myself is trying to tell me. And maybe I'm too busy or too, I don't know, in the spokes of daily life to really catch on to. And so I think that's been really helpful for me. The introspection, education is power, and just learning to let go of all of that stuff in the past that was holding me down.
Nice. That's a great answer. Thank you
Thanks.
so much. And yes, I agree with a lot of that, especially the willingness to just let go and know it's going to be okay and finding your own path. We each have incredible life force. We just need to put that life force in the right direction and use it to live our best life. You be the good, right?
Yeah.
In the words of Gandhi.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I were to sum all of that down, it would just be letting go of the past and moving forward in the way that makes you feel happy and fulfilled and that doesn't cause harm to others.
Yes.
So
Awesome.
yeah, thanks for that little moment. Just like, what has helped me? That was fun.
Yes.
Well, this has been awesome. And guys, if you're watching, thank you so much for sticking out to the end. Let us know if you got this far. We really appreciate your support. You can support the podcast by liking, subscribing, and commenting some words of encouragement for Claire. And if you want to support even further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/cults to consciousness. Our newest patrons, Becca and Carol, thank you so much for your support. We are going to be doing a live Q&A, patrons only, in the next 1 or 2 weeks. So if you want to be part of that, go head over to Patreon. And if you like this episode, I will put Claire's other episode here along with another one that you'll want to check out. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.